Hey friends, tonight, let's explore why a creature as massive and wrinkly as an elephant once tiptoed into the hearts and politics of medieval Europe, and why people reacted like someone had brought a dragon into brunch. It's the year 1255, and you're standing on the banks of the Thames. The air smells like wet hay, stale fish, and courtly curiosity. You're here because something is arriving today. Something big. Literally. The crowd is murmuring with anticipation. Peasants on tiptoes, nobles craning their necks. Even the falcons look mildly interested, and they usually only care about things that squeak. Then it appears. A barge creaks toward the dock, and upon it stands, well, frankly, a miracle. A creature so out of place that even the river seems to hush in awe. It's tall, very tall, gray-wrinkled, and staring back at everyone with an expression that says, I did not sign up for this tour. You, my friend, are witnessing the arrival of Henry III's elephant. Not an elephant. The elephant. Singular. Sourced from the King of France, who got it from somewhere in the East India, probably. The logistics are murky, but let's just say that getting a 5-ton animal across continents without Google Maps or refrigeration was a feat of sheer stubbornness. The elephant is led with surprising gentleness. Its ears flap slowly, as if waving at a slower dimension. Courtiers are scribbling notes. Children gasp. One monk faints dramatically, which you later find out was just a ruse to sneak closer. The elephant is escorted to the Tower of London, where it will live in a specially made enclosure. And by specially made, we mean hastily repurposed bear pit, padded with straw and wishful thinking. Let's pause here for tonight's historical fact. In 1255, King Henry III did indeed receive an elephant from King Louis IX of France. It was the first known elephant in England since Roman times. People were so fascinated by it that chroniclers recorded its arrival like it was a celestial event, and in many ways it was. This was no ordinary animal. It was a living emblem of power, curiosity, and cross-cultural awe. What's especially delightful is how people tried to understand it. Medieval scholars didn't know what to do with an elephant. Some called it a kind of royal ox. Others insisted it was a man-made creature powered by wind and hidden gears. One bishop claimed the elephant had no knees and couldn't lie down, which is wrong, but charmingly confident. The local legend says the elephant was given a gallon of wine a day to keep it happy. Whether or not that's true, you can imagine the tower guards raising a toast to their new, slightly tipsy roommate each evening. Let's not ignore the weird detail of the enclosure the elephant was displayed to the public, but only select groups were allowed inside. So it became a sort of velvet rope animal celebrity. If you were someone important, you got to pet it. If you were a commoner, you got to wonder what it smelled like from across the moat. Here comes the delightful oddity of the night. In some records, people described the elephant as a marvel sent from heaven to humble the proud. But also someone thought its trunk was a snake attached to its face, which makes it less divine, more unfortunate chimera. Now let's dip a toe into a soft academic debate. Was this elephant truly a symbol of wisdom in its own time, or did later centuries project that meaning back onto it? After all, the classical world saw elephants as noble and almost philosophical. But the medieval world, they were still figuring out where its mouth was. Some texts placed it in the chest. You lean on a wooden rail watching as the elephant reaches for a bunch of apples with its trunk. The movement is oddly graceful, like a curtain swaying in candlelight. The crowd gasps. It's not doing anything dramatic, just being itself. But that's the marvel of it. In a world of plagues battles and wool taxes, seeing something unexpected and gentle was practically a miracle. It shifts its weight, flaps its ears, and lets out a low rumble. Somewhere in the back, a scribe whispers, "It spoke," you roll your eyes. As twilight settles over the tower, the elephant slowly lumbers into its shelter. The audience disperses murmuring like they've witnessed something holy. And perhaps in their world they had. And you're just glad you showed up early and didn't have to stand behind that guy with the feathered hat. 3 gentle thoughts before we end. The elephant was given a special diet that may have included roast chicken. Yes, people didn't know it was an herbivore. Henry III reportedly adored the animal and paid a small fortune for its care, which is sweet until you remember he also forgot to pay his own soldiers. Medieval drawings of the elephant often gave it hooves. Hooves. Like it was some divine cow-snake hybrid sent to confuse art students. A gift too large. You're walking beside a royal procession now, though walking might be generous. You're being herded slowly behind a gilded wagon that creaks under the weight of something enormous, something vaguely gray, and definitely not from around here. Ahead of you, musicians try to strike up a cheerful tune, but every time the drum sounds, the creature in the cart flaps its ears in protest. One drum, roll away from an elephant-sized tantrum. Tonight, you're in the court of King Louis IX of France. The year is somewhere in the early 1250s, and the mood is complicated. The king has returned from a crusade, which was a polite way of saying international misunderstanding with swords, and he's feeling generous or strategic, depending on whom you ask. So he sends a present, but not just any present, a live elephant, as you do. Now here's tonight's historical fact. In 1254, King Louis IX of France sent an elephant as a diplomatic gift to King Henry III of England. This was no random gesture. It was part goodwill, offering part look at what I have access to, and part medieval version of flexing your trade routes. Because getting an elephant wasn't just about having one. It was about proving you had the connections to get one. Let's take a moment to appreciate the logistical absurdity. First, the elephant likely came from somewhere in the Indian subcontinent. It had to be transported overland or via ship to the Middle East, then onward, possibly through North Africa or across the Mediterranean to Europe. From there, more ships, more carts, more startled villagers. This animal would have seen more countries than most monks with a map. And then came the politics. You don't just send a massive wild animal across borders without some paperwork, or at least heavily wax-sealed letters written in suspicious Latin. You overhear 2 scribes arguing near the stables. Is it a bribe or a blessing? It's definitely both. Louis knew what he was doing. Elephants had appeared in Western courts before rarely, but when they did, they made waves. One was gifted by the Abbasid Caliph to Charlemagne in the 9th century. His name was Abul Abbas, and he lived just long enough to become legend. That one traveled with Charlemagne's army. This one, it'll sit behind a moat and raise the property value of the Tower of London. You're suddenly reminded that gifts in medieval terms weren't just thoughtful, they were statements. Power had to be visible and preferably trumpeting. Now here's your quirky detail of the evening the elephant was reportedly not shipped alone. Some accounts suggest it traveled with caretakers who spoke little to no French or English, which led to the awkward problem of no one understanding how to feed or house it, including the elephant. Imagine the conversations What does it eat? Hay more, hay bread, more, hay wine. The awkwardness escalated quickly. Henry III, upon receiving the elephant, didn't ask where it came from or how it got there. His first concern was where to put it. Thus began the construction of one of the Tower of London's earliest menageries, essentially the first royal zoo. This, of course, led to all kinds of issues. No one knew how to train the elephant. No one had the foggiest idea how long it would live. And worst of all, no one could agree on what it meant. Here's your academic musing for the night. Was the elephant a sign of submission or a signal of superiority? Did Louis send it as a symbol of friendship? Or to remind Henry that France had access to more exotic wonders? Historians debate this because, well, that's what they do. But the answer may lie in the size of the gesture. Elephants were expensive to transport, dangerous to handle, and entirely impractical for European climates. So sending one was either a bold gesture of camaraderie or a very polite burden disguised as a marvel. Either way, Henry accepted it. Not just accepted, celebrated. Within weeks, the animal was the talk of the court. Clerks wrote about it. Artists drew it badly. Poets tried to rhyme with elephant, gave up, and wrote about dragons instead. You walk past a group of schoolboys trying to sketch it from memory. One of them draws it with wings. Another gives it claws. A third tries to label its parts, but gives up and just writes trunk snake. The elephant, meanwhile, seems unimpressed by all of this. It's eating a bundle of vegetables, blinking slowly, like it's seen it all before. Maybe it has. After all, this was a creature meant for forest and jungle, now caught between two kings playing politics with exotic lives. You find a seat near the stable, lean back, and listen to the sounds, hooves and the mud chatter of courtiers, the occasional uncertain trumpet from the main attraction. It's all so delightfully absurd. And here are your closing musings for tonight. The gift of the elephant cost Henry more in upkeep than some castles. 1 barrel of food per day, plus hay, plus wine, plus carpenters constantly fixing fences. One rumor claimed the elephant slept standing up because people assumed it couldn't lie down. In truth, it likely just had nowhere soft enough to try. A French courtier allegedly wept when the elephant was loaded onto the boat, either from affection or the realization he'd just lost the strangest roommate of his life. The Papal Parade. You're somewhere in Rome now. At least that's what the dust incense and chaotic energy suggest. The year is 1514, and the streets are buzzing. Not with traders, not with pilgrims, not with scandalous gossip about cardinals' nephews. Well, maybe a little of that, but with excitement over an elephant. Yes, another one. This time, the Holy See gets in on the act. Because apparently, even popes weren't immune to the charms of a 1,000-pound ambassador with flapping ears and a deep philosophical stare. Today, Pope Leo X is hosting a parade. He has many titles: Supreme Pontiff, Bishop of Rome, Vicar of Christ. But what he really wants to be called today is Proud Elephant Dad. So here comes Hanno. Tonight's historical fact. In 1514, King Manuel French of Portugal gifted an elephant named Hanno to Pope Leo X. Hanno quickly became a favorite of the papal court and was paraded through Rome in an extravagant display of wealth alliance and gentle absurdity. You're standing under a flapping canopy of silks and papal banners. Trumpets are blaring, but Hanno doesn't seem to mind. He moves slowly through the crowd, draped in a crimson and gold cloth embroidered with lilies, crosses, and probably some poor monk's hand-sewn regrets. People cheer. Nobles bow. A cardinal actually faints. but that might be due to the heat or jealousy. And here's your odd detail of the evening. Hanno was trained to kneel before the Pope. Kneel. On command. In a ceremony so heavy with symbolism that it practically glowed. You watch it happen. The crowd hushes. Hanno lifts one massive front leg, then another, and lowers himself, like he's practiced this more than most courtiers ever practiced humility. Pope Leo beams. Somewhere in the crowd, a theologian whispers something about divine beasts. A poet starts scribbling what will eventually become a surprisingly bad sonnet. This whole affair, of course, wasn't just for fun. It was about diplomacy. Portugal wanted papal favor for its expanding empire trade routes, especially with India, were hot commodities. So why not seal the deal with a diplomatic elephant? There's something delightfully medieval about it, giving a pope an animal from another continent and saying, "Blessings also, please support my fleet." Here's where the academic waters get murky again. Was the elephant a religious symbol, a worldly distraction, or both? Some saw it as a nod to the wisdom of Solomon. Others said it symbolized the church's dominion across all creatures. And then there were skeptics who simply grumbled that feeding it cost more than half the basilica's candle budget. Hanno, meanwhile, lived in the Vatican gardens. He was bathed in rose water. He had his own stable. He reportedly loved sugar lumps and melon rinds. He was also, according to notes left by papal attendants, incredibly polite. You sit on a bench near the courtyard, watching as scribes follow Hanno's every move. One is detailing his dung patterns. Yes, truly, history includes this. Another is sketching his tail. A third has just written, "His gaze carries the sadness of Eden." Bit dramatic, but points for flair. Now for the part nobody wants to remember. Hanno didn't live very long. Only about 2 years. The cause? Laxative overdose. Yes. The court doctors, in an attempt to treat what they thought was constipation, administered gold-laced medicine. It did not go well. The Pope reportedly mourned deeply. A monument was built. Some said prayers. Others just quietly moved on to parrots and leopards. And here's your triple tuck-in of trivia before we drift off. Hanno arrived in Rome, accompanied by his own mahout, a handler from India, who could give commands in multiple languages, which impressed everyone except the Latin scholars. During the parade, he sprayed water on the crowd as a greeting. This was considered both hilarious and slightly miraculous. After his death, Raphael, yes, that Raphael, was asked to design a fresco to honor him. Sadly, it was never completed, but the sketch survives. You rest your head back as the bells of St. Peter's toll faintly in the distance. Somewhere another procession begins, but none of them will ever quite compare to the day Rome stopped to watch an elephant kneel before a pope. And to think some people say history isn't weird enough to keep them up at night. Elephant logic. The room smells faintly of wax mildew and misguided confidence. You're in a scriptorium, a medieval workspace where monks spend their lives hunched over parchments, quills twitching like nervous squirrels, shelves grown with scrolls, and in the corner, Brother Anselm is arguing with Brother Hugo over something that sounds ridiculous, but is in fact quite serious, whether or not elephants have sex. Yes, this is what counts as theological debate today. You sit cross-legged beside a flickering lamp, parchment in hand, listening as the conversation builds like a thundercloud over a very confused animal. Brother Anselm thunders, "Elephants do not mate like common beasts. They are too noble. They conceive through pure intention, not carnal knowledge." Brother Hugo scoffs, And I suppose next you'll say the female elephant swallows the wind and becomes pregnant by the will of God's silence. Because actually, yes, that's exactly what the book says. Tonight's historical fact. For centuries in medieval Europe, it was widely believed, thanks to texts like the Physiologus, that elephants were so morally upright, so pure of spirit, that they didn't engage in physical intimacy like other animals. Instead, pregnancy happened via the female swallowing wind while bathing in a sacred river. That was the theory. You shift uncomfortably, unsure how to process this. The idea sounds like someone misread a Greek poem, misunderstood a breeze, and ran with it. But to the medieval mind, elephants weren't just large animals. They were moral symbols, living embodiments of chastity, wisdom, and even marital fidelity. In fact, texts said they mated once every 7 years, modest to a fault. This wasn't science. This was allegory masquerading as zoology. And it mattered. Medieval bestiaries, those beautifully illustrated animal encyclopedias that doubled as theological instruction manuals, used elephants to teach virtue. A noble beast that lives in harmony, protects its young, and avoids sin. Perfect metaphor. Add a little confusion about biology, and voila, you've got an elephant who's practically a monk. Here's your curious detail. For tonight, some texts claimed elephants had no joints in their legs and could not lie down. If they fell, they needed help from other elephants to rise again, thus becoming paragons of friendship and community. Even their inability to kneel was turned into virtue. You peek over at one of the drawings. The elephant looks more like a tall pig with hooves and a smile that suggests it's planning taxes. You're reminded of another passage, this one written with absolute confidence. The elephant fears only the dragon and is wise enough to avoid war. Of course, this dragon mentioned casually, like a common pest, has never been proven to exist. But in medieval natural philosophy, that wasn't a problem. It was about moral meaning, not biological fact. So what does this tell us? Here comes your gentle academic nudge of the evening. The medieval understanding of elephants wasn't zoological. It was theological. They weren't trying to learn about the animal itself, but rather to project ideals onto it. Purity, wisdom, dignity. If the facts didn't fit well, reinterpret them until they did. You step outside the scriptorium now. The night air smells of damp leaves and old ink. Somewhere a church bell chimes. In the courtyard, a statue of an elephant stands proudly. Its trunk raised its body, inscribed with phrases in Latin, praising its chaste nature and memory of paradise. It's deeply inaccurate and yet weirdly touching. You pause, imagining a real elephant standing among the monks, listening to these debates, blinking slowly, and thinking, I just wanted some fruit. 3 sleepy chuckles before you drift off. One monk wrote that the elephant's breath could cure sin. Another said it smelled of cinnamon. That elephant had been nowhere near a spice market. Illustrators often drew the male and female elephant back to back during conception, separated by a river. Awkward for both parties. A bishop once used the elephant's moral chastity to argue for clerical celibacy, and then compared himself to a tusked beast during a sermon. It did not go well. And you curl up with the image of an elephant lounging in a hot spring, accidentally inventing virtue just by existing. Scrolls and tusks. You're in a lecture hall or something close to it, except instead of a whiteboard and a tired professor with coffee breath, there's a stone lectern, a candle-dripping chandelier, and a scholar wearing robes that haven't seen soap since the last lunar eclipse. The room smells of beeswax, damp parchment, and ambition. The audience, young students, all bleary-eyed, half awake, and clutching quills like weapons against confusion. Tonight's topic, the elephant as interpreted by medieval academia. And yes, they're dead serious. The scholar clears his throat dramatically. He's holding up a rolled vellum scroll decorated with illustrations so enthusiastic they've nearly collapsed under their own ink. It shows, you guessed it, an elephant, except it has cloven hooves and very human eyes and possibly a hat. Welcome to the strange but oddly sincere world of medieval elephantology. Tonight's historical fact. In many medieval universities and courtly schools, elephants were not just curiosities, they were teaching tools. Not from first-hand observation, of course. No, these majestic creatures lived almost entirely in the imagination cobbled together from ancient texts, travelers' tales, and a generous amount of wishful thinking. You glance down at the textbook in your lap, translated from Aristotle and Pliny the Elder, rewritten by monks and decorated by someone who clearly hadn't seen an elephant, but maybe had once glimpsed a parade float from afar. The margin notes read, like fortune cookies, "Elephants are wise and do not forget. Elephants weep when their children die. Elephants can write their names in the dust. Can they, though?" Here's your odd detail of the night. In some manuscripts, elephants are shown wielding writing tools, with their trunks often in battle, sometimes in school settings. One shows an elephant at a desk. Another shows one performing math with beads. You are not making this up. Medieval scholars absolutely believed elephants were capable of understanding language, human speech, and possibly Latin, because why not? There was even an attempt by a few enterprising minds to calculate the ideal mathematical proportions of an elephant. One chart compared an elephant's ear span to the moon's orbit. Another claimed the perfect elephant should be 7 cubits tall, 4 cubits wide, and able to lift its own weight in theology. And what about tusks? Well, according to several texts, tusks weren't just teeth. They were symbols of strength, honor, and divine design. Some argued that the left tusk was male and the right tusk female. One student whispers to another, "So what happens if it loses the female tusk?" The other shrugs. "Probably gets lonely." You sigh. Ivory itself was an object of fascination. It wasn't just used for carving. It was believed to contain traces of the animal's soul. Medieval craftsmen, especially in monasteries, created book covers, altar pieces, and even chess sets from ivory, convinced that it carried blessings, or at the very least, an upgrade to wisdom. Naturally, this created a market, and with it, the rise of some highly questionable trade ethics. Ivory came from distant lands, often through indirect and exploitative means. But once it reached Europe, all that faded behind layers of religious symbolism. And here's your gentle academic question of the night. Were medieval scholars really studying elephants, or just studying themselves through the idea of one? In a world where knowledge often outpaced experience, did the elephant become a mirror for the virtues they wished they had? You look up as the professor gestures grandly to a new drawing. This one shows an elephant balancing a church on its back. The message that wisdom and faith must be carried together. Or maybe that elephants were just really good at construction. You step outside after the lecture ends. The courtyard is quiet, lit only by stars and one overworked torch sputtering beside a statue. You sit on a stone bench, still holding your scroll. The elephant drawn on it smiles, with an expression that suggests it's read more books than you have, and possibly written some. Here are 3 sleepy chuckles before we tuck in. One university tried to classify elephants under marine beasts because someone heard they liked rivers. That classification stuck for 2 centuries. A student in Paris wrote a thesis arguing elephants should be granted honorary citizenship in heaven. The review panel didn't say no, they just didn't answer. A monk once got in trouble for sketching an elephant with wings in the margins of a Bible. He claimed it symbolized divine strength. Everyone else just thought it looked like an airborne cow. You lean back, scroll and lap, and imagine a classroom where the elephant is not just a topic, but the teacher. And honestly, you'd probably learn more. Battlefield beasts. You're standing on a ridge overlooking a battlefield that hasn't started yet, but already smells like fear, sweat, and boiled onions. Across the plain, armies line up in crooked rows, banners flapping like anxious birds. Knights adjust their armor, archers check their bows, and somewhere, someone is loudly regretting the previous night's lentils. But your attention is elsewhere, because emerging from the mist, slow, steady, and definitely not a horse, is something colossal. A gray giant, tusks gleaming ears flapping like sails. Its back is draped in armor. Its sides ripple with muscle. Atop it, a wooden tower, with a man inside gripping a long spear and looking far too pleased with himself. Tonight, you're witnessing what few medieval European soldiers ever had the chance to see: an elephant on the battlefield. Your historical fact for the evening. While elephants were not common in European warfare, they occasionally appeared in battle, most often in contact with Eastern or North African armies, or in stories inspired by ancient history. And when they did show up, they changed everything. Because elephants weren't just weapons, they were psychological events. Imagine being a foot soldier with a helmet made of hope and second-hand chainmail, and suddenly a living wall of elephant comes crashing toward you. It's not just the size, it's the sound, the earth shaking underfoot, the sheer disbelief. Most soldiers didn't even know what they were looking at. There's a chronicle from the Crusades where a European scribe described the enemy's elephant as a living fortress, possessed of the devil, armored in plates, and howling with fire. Not one of those things is accurate, but you understand the sentiment. The elephants used in Eastern and Islamic warfare came from traditions that stretched back centuries: India, Persia, North Africa. Their handlers, called mahouts, trained them not just to march, but to trample, lift, and even gore enemy formations. In some cases, elephants were fitted with armor and spikes. Others carried archers in howdahs, those little wooden forts strapped to their backs, turning each beast into a mobile castle. Meanwhile, the medieval Europeans were less prepared. Here's your odd detail of the night. In one account from the 13th century, a group of English knights mistook an armored elephant for a magical beast. They tried to dispel it with prayer, thinking it was some demonic illusion. The elephant responded by sneezing loudly and charging directly through their formation. You hear the clatter of armor and shouts of confusion as the beast moves down the hill. Horses rear. Trumpeters drop their instruments. A noble shouts something about a retreat, but the only response is a chorus of terrified, "What is that?" from the infantry. And now, for the quieter academic debate, why didn't elephants become a regular part of European armies? The answer is equal parts practical and cultural. First, they were expensive. Keeping an elephant alive, fed, trained, and transported was not exactly a budget-friendly option. Europe, with its colder climates and tight roads, simply wasn't built for elephant logistics. Second, elephants didn't mesh well with Western-style warfare. They were hard to control, in chaotic battles, could panic easily, and sometimes trampled their own side. Even in ancient times, think Hannibal crossing the Alps elephants, were a high-risk, high-dramatic flair kind of move. And finally, there was the myth problem. Europeans had turned elephants into symbols of wisdom, chastity, and holiness. Putting one on a battlefield felt to some like asking a philosopher to throw a javelin. It didn't sit right. Or rather, it couldn't sit at all. Too noble, too complicated, too prone to accidentally crushing the baggage train. You watch now as the elephant swings its head, its tusks glinting in the sun. Soldiers scatter like laundry in the wind. A knight bravely tries to charge it and is gently pushed aside like a toy. The elephant pauses, lifts its trunk, and trumpets once. Loud, long, triumphant. You feel it in your ribs. 3 final observations before we retreat to calmer thoughts. In some legends, elephants were said to mourn the dead after battle, walking among fallen soldiers and touching them with their trunks. Most likely, untrue, but hauntingly poetic. One medieval general tried to disguise a war horse as an elephant by covering it with cloth and attaching fake tusks. It fooled exactly no one. There's a marginalia illustration of an elephant chasing a knight who's dropped his sword and hat. The caption simply reads, "He did not expect the large one. The battlefield fades into dusk." You hear the sound of distant horns, the soft crunch of retreating feet, and one soldier muttering, "Next time we bring cheese." Not whatever that was. And you. You curl up in the grass just beyond the ridge, the earth still humming faintly from the giant steps, and let the wild logic of medieval warfare lull you toward dreams. The elephant who wouldn't fight. You're in a military camp that smells like boiled cabbage, damp leather, and regret. Tents flap lazily in the breeze, and somewhere nearby, a minstrel is trying and failing to write a heroic ballad that rhymes with crossbow. The mood is tense. A battle was supposed to happen today. Instead, everything's stalled. Because something has refused to cooperate. And that something is approximately 10,000 pounds of calm gray defiance. Tonight, you meet an elephant with principles. He stands in the center of the camp unbothered. His massive form is draped in ornamental armor, all brass edging and stitched velvet. There's a flag tied gently to his back. Someone carved a symbol into the wooden howdah, a lion, a sun, and possibly a salad. But the real statement is his posture, completely still, ears flapping slowly, trunk swinging like a metronome set to "no thanks." Because today, this elephant is not moving. And he is definitely not fighting. Tonight's historical fact. While records of war, elephants exist, especially from campaigns involving the Seleucids, the Persians, and certain Islamic empires, there are also tales, often sidelined or half-whispered, of elephants who simply stopped, who refused to advance, who, when pushed, knelt down, not in obedience, in refusal. This, of course, throws the entire army into chaos. The general is fuming. He circles the elephant like a frustrated uncle pacing around a broken cart. You hear mutters like, "It's just being lazy. Maybe it's sick. Do you think it's possessed?" A monk suggests prayer. A merchant offers raisins. A soldier tries yelling, then immediately regrets it. The elephant flicks its ear in a way that feels oddly judgmental. And here comes your wonderfully strange detail of the evening. In at least one medieval account, an elephant halted during a planned siege and refused to trample a city gate. The handlers tried everything: music, incense, even leading a goat as emotional bait. The elephant responded by turning around and walking away. Some called it cowardice. Others called it a miracle. Either way, the siege was postponed. You walk alongside this particular elephant, now your boots crunching softly in the dust. He regards you with the kind of expression usually reserved for disappointed tutors. You offer a pear. He accepts it, slowly. There's something in his eyes, steady, unreadable, ancient. You start to wonder, was he ever trained to fight? Or was that something humans simply assumed? Here's where the debate rolls in, like a foggy cavalry. Can animals choose not to fight? Or is this just discomfort, miscommunication, maybe indigestion? Historians argue over this. Some say the refusal stories are exaggerations, parables dressed up in armor. Others point to moments in elephant training literature where handlers acknowledge personality, mood, even ethics, as if these giants weren't just beasts, but beings. And in the Middle Ages, that line between beast and symbol was already blurry. You sit on a low stone wall nearby, watching a handler walk up to the elephant and whisper something in a forgotten dialect. The elephant snorts gently, then curls his trunk around the man's waist, not tightly, just enough to make a point. A moment of contact that says, I understand. I'm still not doing it. There's a beauty to the standoff. The general yells. The soldiers sigh. The elephant remains still. He doesn't need to stomp or charge. His refusal is louder than any trumpet. Later that night, the army quietly moves camp. The battle is delayed. The elephant is led slowly and without argument back to a shaded area by the river. And the camp tells stories. Some say he was a divine messenger. Others whisper he was a cursed prince. One guy insists he was a reincarnated saint who wanted nothing to do with siege warfare. You just feel grateful to be near something that powerful and that stubborn. 3 peaceful ponderings before we close our eyes. One chronicler claimed a war elephant knelt before a field of poppies and refused to walk over them. That sounds poetic, or made up. Possibly both. Another legend says an elephant only agreed to march after someone read it a psalm. The verse, "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures." Coincidence? Probably. Sweet, yes. In at least one story, an elephant led a battalion halfway to a fortress, then lay down and went to sleep. For 2 days. Siege canceled. You curl into your cloak as the wind shifts, carrying the low, rumbling breath of the elephant across the darkened hills. A quiet protest. A giant at peace. And somehow, that feels like the strongest message of all. How to feed an elephant. You're in a castle courtyard that smells like warm hay, stewed barley, and the kind of panic that comes from realizing your most important guest might starve to death before lunchtime. Cooks are rushing about with baskets of apples, sacks of carrots, and more cabbages than any one animal should be expected to enjoy in a sitting. Over near the gate, a steward is scribbling numbers in the air, muttering, "If it eats 50 pounds a day, that's... oh no." Tonight, you've stumbled into a very specific medieval crisis. How exactly do you feed an elephant? Tonight's historical fact: medieval Europeans had little to no experience caring for elephants. When these creatures were gifted to royals, or the church, like Henry III's elephant in London, or Hanno in the Vatican, they became immediate logistical nightmares. Feeding them wasn't just a matter of quantity. It was a question of what on earth do they even eat? You walk beside a trembling kitchen assistant who's holding a basket of turnips and eyeing the elephant like it might ask for utensils. Around the courtyard, more food is being brought in fruit leafy greens, stale loaves, barrels of oats, and one slightly suspicious goat. No one knows if the goat is a snack or a companion. There's no guidebook for this. No instruction manual titled, "So You've Been Gifted an Elephant in Latin." What they had instead was guesswork prayer and a rotating cast of very nervous cooks. And here's your oddly hilarious detail of the night in more than one record elephants in medieval Europe were fed meat. Not because they needed it, but because no one really understood that elephants are herbivores. One chronicler notes that the beast consumed a boiled hen and 4 pears most gracefully. Another mentions that wine was poured into its drinking trough to warm the belly. Yes, wine. Because in Europe, wine was basically hydration with status. You're standing now by a feeding pen that looks more like a marketplace. A cook with flour on his nose is offering a tray of rye bread. Another tries to hand up a bowl of porridge on a long-handled spoon. The elephant, politely confused, sniffs everything and chooses a melon. The melon disappears in one elegant swoop. The stable master groans. He liked that one. It was imported. The expense, of course, was monumental. Keeping an elephant healthy in a royal court cost more than outfitting a company of knights. Every day, teams had to gather food hall water sweep stalls and coordinate with increasingly exasperated mahouts. Let's pause for a moment and appreciate the math. An average elephant can eat around 150 kilos of vegetation a day. That's roughly 3 wheelbarrows of food every single day. Add to that gallons of water, plus the need for clean space and grooming. And you begin to understand why kings eventually looked at their royal menageries and thought maybe a parrot would have been easier. And yet they kept trying. Because elephants weren't just animals, they were symbols. To feed one was to show wealth. To care for one was to display virtue. Letting one starve a scandal, a metaphor. Possibly a biblical allegory waiting to happen. So kitchens were restructured, schedules were rearranged, royal food tasters were reassigned. One monk writes that he was put in charge of leaf procurement, which he describes as both holy and extremely muddy. You walk over to a pile of vegetable scraps now, where a child is arranging them into little towers. The elephant watches quietly, then knocks one over with its trunk. The child shrieks with joy. The steward shrieks with horror. The cook just sighs. This is your life now. Here's your academic musing of the evening. The effort to feed elephants in Europe tells us more about medieval bureaucracy than zoology. From the papal records of Hanno's daily meals to the Tower of London's expense rolls under Henry III, we see a system of trial and error wrapped in ceremony and noble panic. The elephant didn't just eat food, it consumed resources, status, and attention. It became a machine that turned produce into prestige. And just as importantly, it reminded everyone involved how little they actually knew. You sit now at the edge of the enclosure, a slice of apple in hand. The elephant approaches slowly, eyes calm trunk, swaying like a lazy metronome. It takes the apple, holds your gaze for a long second, and then sneezes right in your lap. 3 final thoughts to chew on before sleep takes you. One record shows a king instructing his cooks to prepare mashed chestnuts with honey for his elephant, because it was a royal dish, and surely the beast deserves civility. An alchemist suggested feeding the elephant gold leaf to enhance its natural dignity. It passed through if you're wondering. A cleric tried fasting for 3 days to share the hunger with a sick elephant. The elephant recovered. The cleric fainted. The moral remains unclear. You lie back in the grass, the stars twinkling above like the freckles of a much larger creature, and you think feeding something so large shouldn't feel so intimate, and yet it does. The Monk and the Beast. You're inside a monastery, now quiet, stone-walled and heavy with the scent of old books, beeswax candles, and something faintly herbal, like someone's been drying mint in a desperate attempt to cover the smell of elephant. Because yes, the monastery has an elephant, and not just any elephant, your elephant. At least that's how Brother Elred refers to him. He calls the elephant Brother Eligius, and the elephant seems okay with that. Tonight's historical fact: in rare and curious cases, elephants were housed in religious communities, particularly when a traveling noble or royal decided that a monastery was a peaceful, safe place to temporarily quarter a creature too large for a castle courtyard. In some cases, monks grew unusually attached. You walk softly down a cloister hall, listening to the distant scrape of sandaled feet and the steady rhythm of a trunk brushing the ground. Brother Aelred is ahead, a gentle man in fraying robes, a beard that would terrify a brush, and an expression that says he once took a vow of silence and deeply regrets giving it up. He's reading aloud from Psalms to the elephant, and the elephant, by all appearances, is listening. Here's your odd detail of the night. Some monastic records suggest that certain monks believed elephants to be creatures closer to Eden, possessing unclouded minds and a natural affinity for divine wisdom. One text even refers to the elephant as the contemplative beast, able to sense holiness and reject sin. That last part might be projection. Or maybe the elephant just didn't like the abbot. You follow Brother Aelred out to the monastery garden, where he tosses pears into a basket while lecturing the elephant about humility. We must all kneel before the Creator Eligius. Even you, yes. I know it's not comfortable. The elephant nudges him gently and picks up a dropped pear, then eats the basket. Brother Aelred sighs but doesn't scold. And here's your soft academic musing. Was this affection genuine, or a carefully cultivated piece of symbolism? After all, monks spent their days interpreting the world through metaphors. An elephant who listens to scripture. That's practically a sermon in itself. But Brother Aelred seems sincere. He doesn't parade the elephant for visitors. He doesn't write grand letters about it to Rome. He just lives alongside him, prays aloud, brushes his hide. Once a week, he scrubs his tusks with a cloth soaked in rosewater and says, "Even your bones must shine for God." You sit beneath a fig tree now, where the shade is wide and warm. The elephant settles nearby, folding his legs slowly, like someone trying not to wake a snoring roommate. Brother Aelred sits too cross-legged and begins telling you how he met the beast. Apparently, it was raining. The escort had no plan. The bishop was furious, and the elephant? He just walked into the monastery, went straight to the altar, and stood there for an hour unmoving. No one had the courage to stop him, or mop the floor afterward. That night, Brother Aelred prayed, and the next morning, he woke to find the elephant standing at the chapel door, waiting, as if to say, "All right, monk, show me something worth staying for." Since then, they've been companions, a monk and his elephant, quiet students of the same silence. And now, for 3 delightfully absurd bedtime moments, Brother Aelred once tried to teach the elephant to bow during matins. The elephant responded by ringing the monastery bell with his trunk every morning at 4 a.m. When another monk doubted the elephant's moral purity, Brother Aelred pointed out that it had never once stolen wine, which he added made it holier than half the choir. For Christmas, the monks gifted the elephant a robe made from spare wool cloaks stitched together. He wore it for 1 hour, then used it as a pillow for 3 days. You close your eyes, now lulled by the sounds of late vespers and the rhythmic breath of something vast and gentle beside you. In the quiet heart of this old stone place, where words rise like incense and time moves like honey, you found something rare, not just history, but peace. Ivory and Irony. You're in a workshop, now somewhere between sacred and suspicious. The air is thick with dust, the musky perfume of beeswax polish, and that quiet intensity that only comes when someone is carving something precious. Every surface is covered in wood shavings, scraps of cloth, and curls of ivory so thin they float when you breathe too hard. At the center of the room stands a table, sturdy scarred and crowded with tools that glint under lamplight. And in the center of that table, a single tusk, long, pale, curved like the smile of a ghost, and it once belonged to an elephant. Tonight's historical fact. In medieval Europe, ivory was among the most prized materials for art, religious relics, and luxury objects. It was used to craft everything from crucifixes to chess sets, croziers to combs. And while most ivory came from elephants killed far from European eyes, the arrival or death of a live elephant in Europe often became an opportunity for both grief and repurposing. You stand beside a carver, now a man with steady hands and a hunched back. His name is Master Etienne, and he doesn't talk much. He hums mostly, off-key hymns and work songs with more syllables than logic. He's shaping a miniature Madonna from the ivory core, her robes flowing like melted candlelight. It's beautiful. It's also vaguely uncomfortable, because you know where that tusk came from. Etienne pauses, wiping sweat from his brow, with a rag that leaves more dust than it removes. He was a gift from the East, you know. The beast. Died last winter. Stomach trouble, they said. Or loneliness. And now, here he is, being transformed into a set of devotional panels for a noblewoman's private chapel. You wander past shelves lined with ivory objects. Some are religious rosary beads, tiny saints, the Virgin Mary, looking suspiciously French. Others are personal knife handles, combs, dice, and charms shaped like protective animals. All intricate, all smooth, all made from the same raw memory. Here's your strange and slightly bitter detail of the night. In several documented cases, ivory from royal elephants, those few who died in Europe, was immediately claimed by the crown or church and distributed to artists or patrons as a form of symbolic continuity. The elephant, even in death, was expected to serve. But let's be honest, that symbolism wasn't always noble. Ivory was a status symbol. To own it was to show taste. To wear it, power. A bishop's crozier carved from elephant tusk wasn't just elegant, it whispered of dominion over nature itself. And yet the irony sat just beneath the surface. These sacred items used in worship and prayer, in sermons about humility, came from a creature whose life had been paraded, misunderstood, and finally rendered into art. You pick up a carved panel now. It shows an elephant being led by a saint across a desert. Everyone's smiling. The sun has a face. The elephant looks a bit like a hairy cow. It's beautiful. It's completely wrong. Here's where we ease into a gentle academic quarrel. Did medieval Europe see ivory as a holy material because of the elephant's symbolic reputation? Or did it assign the elephant that reputation because of the rarity and holiness of ivory? It's a tusk or egg situation. What we do know is this ivory carvings were believed to carry the memory of the creature, its strength, its nobility, even its silence. That silence especially was considered sacred. The elephant doesn't speak, one cleric wrote, because it has nothing to prove. You glance over at Master Etienne again. He's polishing a reliquary lid, now humming louder. He nods toward you and says, "People think it's just bone, but it listens, you know. You carve it wrong, it cracks. You carve it right, it keeps secrets. And now, as you sit quietly beside the workshop, fire let these three reflections settle in your thoughts. A queen once had an ivory mirror carved with images of chastity and lions. She dropped it. The crack was blamed on unspoken sin. It was probably just the floor. One monastery claimed a sliver of elephant tusk was incorruptible. It refused to rot. They displayed it in a silver box next to a vial of saint's hair. Pilgrims were unimpressed. A bishop once gave away an ivory chess set as penance for being too proud. He then commissioned another one, even bigger. Humility apparently has upgrades. You lean back against the wall of the workshop, warmed by the fire, lulled by the sound of the carving knife slicing through centuries, and you think not all memory fades. Some of it becomes smooth, quiet, and holy in someone else's hands. Elephant astrology. You're in a circular tower chamber tonight where the ceiling disappears into a dome of stars, some painted, some real, all shimmering with the kind of conviction only medieval astrologers could conjure. The floor is tiled with symbols, lions' crescents, fish with wings, and yes, an elephant, right there next to Saturn, as if it belongs in the sky as much as it does on land. A man in a long robe, equal parts scholar and sleep-deprived enthusiast, is busy charting birth signs by candlelight. His name is Master Theobald, and he insists the elephant is governed by the same celestial rules as king saints and disgruntled peasants. He gestures you forward, then dramatically rolls out a star chart big enough to wrap a cathedral bell. Here look, elephant born under Capricorn. You know what that means. Of course you don't, but I'll tell you anyway. Tonight's historical fact. In the late medieval period, astrology wasn't just about humans. Some scholars extended horoscopic systems to include animals particularly noble or exotic ones, like lions, falcons, and yes, elephants. It was believed that celestial alignments at birth could influence an animal's temperament, abilities, and even divine purpose. You lean in, trying to follow Theobald's reasoning. He points to a constellation shaped vaguely like a squirrel. That's the horn of patience, he says. When aligned with the elephant star, it signals wisdom, long memory, and occasionally stubbornness during eclipses. You try not to laugh. He is very serious. According to Theobald's writings, which he's clearly proud of, elephants are ruled by a blend of Jupiter and Saturn. Jupiter gives them nobility, dignity, and a sense of justice. Saturn, on the other hand, lends them melancholy patience and an appreciation for gloomy weather. You're now being shown a document titled Celestial Correspondences of the Elephantine Mind. You wonder briefly if this is satire. It is not. He reads aloud, "The elephant, when born under a waxing moon, and during Mars in retrograde, shall possess courage in battle and an appetite for fennel. You hear someone in the hallway trip over a stool and curse in Latin. Here's your peculiar detail of the night. In one court astrologer's notes, a royal elephant was given a full natal chart and blessed accordingly with herbs on feast days. This same elephant reportedly refused to enter the courtyard on days when Mercury was combust, which caused an entire festival to be rescheduled. Coincidence? Who's to say? You're ushered toward the observatory window now, where Theobald offers you a spyglass that looks suspiciously like a hollowed-out breadstick. Look there, do you see it? That bright star, that's Elephantis Minor. You do not see it. Still, you nod. He continues, elephants being born of earth, but touched by heaven, are more attuned to lunar rhythms than most beasts. That's why they're calm during full moons, agitated during storms, and deeply suspicious of Aquarius rising. It's all beautifully absurd. Here's your scholarly musing of the night. Was medieval elephant astrology a genuine belief, a poetic metaphor, or simply a way for court astrologers to stay employed when no royal babies were being born? Historians aren't quite sure. Some texts seem entirely literal. Others suggest it was more about associating the elephant with cosmic order, its slow movements, its great size, its enduring memory. If the heavens were steady and majestic, then surely the elephant was their representative on earth. You lean against the stone ledge, now looking up at the stars. The sky feels very far away, and yet oddly connected. Somewhere out there, a scholar once thought, is a constellation shaped like an elephant guiding kings, calming storms, reminding us that the universe is vast and just a little bit weird. And now, as always, 3 celestial curiosities before bedtime. One noblewoman insisted her elephant was born under the sign of Libra because it never stepped on her foot. Her astrologer agreed for a fee. An astrological bestiary described the elephant as a creature of air trapped in earth, which probably sounds better in Latin. During a solar eclipse, a duke reportedly ordered his elephant to be wrapped in black velvet to prevent it from absorbing bad planetary energy. The elephant ate the velvet. You turn from the window, letting the stars spin slowly behind you. The tower is quiet now, except for the scribbling of Theobald and the faint sound of owl wings outside. And you feel a little more grounded and oddly stellar. The elephant in the map room. You're in a vaulted room where parchment hangs like curtains and the dust smells expensive. Candles flicker against giant hand-drawn maps that sprawl across tables' walls, even the ceiling beams. Oceans are painted of brooding blue land masses outlined in ink that's faded with time and cartographic overconfidence. Some regions are blank, marked with hopeful dragons. Others are labeled with things like very spicy or unfit for sheep. And there, near the equator, stomping through a miniature painted jungle, an elephant. Not a herd, just one. Enormous, decorated, completely out of proportion, probably symbolic, possibly prophetic. Tonight's historical fact: in many medieval European maps, especially, Mappae Mundi elephants were often drawn not to indicate population or habitat, but to signal wonder wealth and the edge of the known world. Their appearance was less about zoology and more about declaring, you have officially left the part of the world we sort of understand. You trace a finger across one of the maps. There's an elephant near India, its feet planted on what looks like a mountain, its back supporting what might be a palace. The scribe wasn't going for realism. He was going for awe. Maps in the medieval period weren't just tools for navigation. They were statements of theology, imagination, and power. And elephants. They made excellent exclamation points. Here's your odd detail of the night. On one surviving map from the 13th century, there's an elephant drawn wearing what can only be described as a crown. The caption reads, "Here be the beasts of Solomon." Whether this refers to biblical trade routes, real encounters, or pure cartographic daydreaming is unclear. But the implication is obvious: where elephants go, meaning follows. You sit beside a cartographer now, Master Wilfred, a man with ink-stained fingers and the suspicious squint of someone who spent too much time arguing with compasses. He's adding details to a coast near Africa, grumbling about wind directions, trade ports, and inaccurate sailor gossip. He pauses, dips his quill, then draws an elephant. Just one. You ask him why. He shrugs. To balance the tiger on the other side. This apparently is cartographic logic, but there's more to it. In the medieval mind, elephants symbolized order beyond chaos. They belonged to distant lands, where spices grew on trees, where silk shimmered on wild breezes, where the sun felt closer. Placing one on a map wasn't just decorative, it was thematic. It told the viewer, beyond this point lies mystery wealth and probably divine lessons. Some maps placed elephants in Asia, others in Africa. A few daringly had them marching toward the edge of Europe, as if to say, they're coming. Get your scrolls ready. You watch now, as Wilfred adds one last flourish, a monk sitting on the elephant's back, arms raised in prayer. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs again. It's metaphorical. Probably. Here's your academic drift-off of the evening medieval maps weren't about accuracy. They were about worldview. And elephants, with their enormous size and symbolic baggage, fit perfectly into the visual grammar of mystery. They weren't just creatures. They were punctuation marks in the sentence of creation. You recline against a rolled-up map case, feeling the room hum with candlelight and curiosity. A breeze stirs the edges of a parchment, labeled "The Ends of the Earth." It crinkles gently, like it's trying to remind you it's never been folded properly. And now, 3 lightly ridiculous cartographic notes. Before dreams, one map placed an elephant in what is clearly Ireland. No one knows why. Some think the scribe sneezed. A marginal note on a Venetian map reads, "The elephant here was witnessed by 5 men, one of whom fainted." Another map labels an elephant very loyal. Smells of jasmine. Not dangerous unless provoked by trumpets. The candlelight dims. You imagine the elephant slowly walking off the edge of the map into the dark space beyond the parchment, and somehow that feels comforting. A Royal Bedfellow. You're in a royal chamber, now lavishly draped in silks, candlelit, to the point of fire hazard, and so overstuffed with tapestries that even the echo feels muffled. Perfumed air wafts from bowls of dried lavender, and citrus peels trying desperately to cover up the faint whiff of hay. And near the bed, not beside it, not outside it, but near it, is an elephant, sleeping, softly, rhythmically, like a very large, very dignified snore machine. Tonight's historical fact: in at least one royal account from the late medieval period, an elephant was housed so close to the royal apartments that it was said the king heard its breath through the walls each night and found comfort in its steadiness. Whether this is poetic embellishment or architectural impracticality, it points to a strange truth. Sometimes monarchs kept their elephants unnervingly close. You tiptoe around the edge of a velvet divider. On one side, silken sheets, a crown resting on a stool, and an open window letting in the cool night breeze. On the other, hay scattered like forgotten confetti, a massive gray flank, rising and falling, and a small pile of cabbages that have clearly been nibbled with restraint and regret. No one is quite sure how this arrangement came to be. The elephant wasn't always this close. But one winter, when the royal kennels flooded and the stables froze, someone decided that the large, warm creature might fare better near the kitchens. Then someone decided near meant indoors. And then somehow it just stayed. At first, the nobles complained. The smell, the noise, the risk of being stepped on during midnight chamber pot excursions. But the king, who reportedly suffered from insomnia, claimed the elephant's breathing helped him sleep. Like the world's largest white noise machine with tusks. And here's your odd detail of the night attendants were assigned nightly shifts to brush the elephant's ears so it wouldn't flap them too loudly. One unlucky footman wrote in his diary, "I have lost all sense of dignity, but gained knowledge of elephant ear texture. It is like very old velvet." The elephant, for his part, was remarkably polite. Never trampled a footstool, never chewed the bed curtains, always waited until dawn to trumpet unless startled by the queen's snoring, which could trigger a mutual panic. You sit by the fireplace now watching the soft glow reflect off tusks that have been polished to a ceremonial sheen. The elephant shifts slightly in its sleep, releasing a breath that smells faintly of apples and diplomacy. The royal guards, once skeptical, now swear the beast brings luck. The king's dreams, reportedly chaotic before the elephant arrived, have since become calmer. Less war, more waterfalls. Fewer coups. More cuddly symbols of power. You wonder, is it possible for a ruler to feel protected by something so large, so silent? Is the elephant a bodyguard, a spiritual anchor, or just a really comforting roommate? Here's your academic pondering tonight. Did proximity to exotic animals reinforce a ruler's divinely appointed authority, or was it simply a medieval form of emotional support wrapped in symbolism and hay? Some historians argue that keeping an elephant so close was a way to embody dominion over nature. Others suspect it was loneliness in silk robes, soothed by a trunk, reaching for pears at midnight. Now for 3 nightlight-worthy facts before slumber. One chronicler claimed the king whispered state secrets to the elephant because it would never betray him. He may have been right. A lady-in-waiting reported being startled awake when the elephant stuck its trunk through a window and stole her bread roll. She later described it as divine intervention. The elephant once sneezed during a royal banquet. Half the court blessed it. The other half fled. The bishop reportedly did both. The fire cracks softly. The room is warm, and the breath of the elephant continues steady, grounding old as the hills. Somewhere nearby, a monarch dreams not of conquest, but of peaceful gray forests, and the soft sound of hooves through mist. And you feel safe enough to rest. School of Pachyderms. You're at the edge of a wide stone courtyard now tucked behind the stables of a forgotten southern duchy, watching something that can only be described as surreal a school. For elephants. No, not metaphorical elephants. Not statues. Real living munching, occasionally trumpet blasting elephants. And yes, someone appears to be giving them a lesson. The instructor, a man with a very large hat, a very long pointer stick, and the utterly misplaced confidence of someone who thinks a herd of 5-ton animals can be taught manners before lunch. Tonight's historical fact. While medieval Europe never developed formal elephant training academies like those found in South Asia or the Islamic world, there are scattered records, half anecdote, half awestruck observation of attempts to educate elephants in royal and noble households. These efforts ranged from practical obedience to what we can only describe as polite delusion. You watch as one elephant attempts to bow. The trainer claps enthusiastically. Another lifts its trunk and places a straw hat on a passing monk. The monk does not seem amused. This is less a curriculum and more a circus audition. Still, it's endearing. The idea apparently was that elephants, being noble creatures closer to heaven than hedgehogs, could be taught not just tricks, but virtue. One noble in Burgundy tried to teach his elephant discipline through scripture. Another believed elephants could learn musical timing and attempted to have one accompany a lute performance with stomps. The concert ended early. You now spot a chalkboard. Someone has written, Lesson 1, walk with grace. Lesson 2, respond to trumpet, not trumpet. Lesson 3, avoid the bishop's roses. Here's your oddity of the evening. There's a surviving letter from a 14th century tutor who claimed to have taught an elephant how to recognize basic Latin phrases. His proof: the elephant allegedly backed away when he shouted maledictus and lifted its trunk at benedictus. Whether this was real understanding or well-timed coincidence is anyone's guess. Probably the elephant's. You wander closer, only to hear the instructor say, "Now, Elfrida, demonstrate your bow." Elfrida, an elephant wearing a garland of dried herbs, sways gently, then lowers her front legs in something vaguely resembling a curtsy. The crowd of watching scribes applauds. A small boy throws her an apple. She catches it midair. Another student faints. This is clearly the best lesson anyone has had all week. Here comes your academic pondering. Was this early attempt at training elephants an act of curiosity control or companionship? Some say it was about projecting royal authority. If a ruler could tame the largest beast known to man, surely they could govern mere people. Others think it was born from wonder, the sheer delight of interacting with something so enormous yet so responsive. Either way, the schools were more symbolic than structured. One court manual, unofficial, scrawled in the margin of a falconry guide, includes this advice: if thy elephant should refuse the lesson, consider whether the lesson is worthy of its time. You can't argue with that. And now, 3 scholastic snorts before sleep, a noblewoman once had her elephant blessed before its education began. The blessing involved rose water, soft chants, and an accidental sneeze that doused 3 acolytes. One student tried to cheat his way into elephant school by dressing as a calf and crawling under a curtain. The elephant stepped on the curtain. Class dismissed. A friar wrote a poem praising the learned beast, which included the line, "He knoweth not his letters, yet he outthinks most lords." You rest now on a low stone bench as the lesson winds down. The sun dips behind the cloister walls, and the elephants begin their slow march back to the shade ears, swaying like sleepy flags. The instructor bows. The elephants do not return it. And you smile, knowing that not everything wise needs to be taught, and not everything taught needs to be wise. The elephant's silence. You're standing in a cathedral courtyard where the wind tiptoes instead of blows, and even the bells seem to hesitate before ringing. Ivy climbs lazily along old stone arches. Birds nest in dusty alcoves, and down below, grazing quietly beside the herb garden, is an elephant. Not trumpeting, not stomping, just there. Enormous and unmoved, like a statue designed by someone who preferred peace to drama. Tonight's historical fact. In the Middle Ages, it was commonly believed that elephants were silent animals. Many bestiaries and religious texts praised them for their supposed inability or refusal to make noise, especially compared to the cacophonous company of donkeys, geese, and humans. Their silence became a kind of virtue, elevated to near-holy status. You sit beside a friar, now Brother Lentinus, whose beard is more bird's nest than facial hair, and who has not stopped staring at the elephant for the last hour. He never speaks, Lentinus says, in a voice soft as candle smoke. A beast this large, and not a sound from him. I think that's proof of his wisdom. You nod, unsure how to tell him that elephants absolutely do make noise. Low rumbles, trumpet snorts, and a variety of polite sneezes when dust is involved. But in this corner of the world, the legend has taken root. The elephant is the quiet philosopher of the animal kingdom. And that myth mattered. Here's your curious detail of the evening a 13th century sermon by an overly enthusiastic bishop claimed that if humans were more like elephants, silent, obedient, slow to anger, we'd have reached paradise already. He then fell off the pulpit during a particularly spirited demonstration of elephant humility. But the point was made. The elephant here in this courtyard doesn't seem particularly holy. He's currently sniffing a rosemary bush with deep suspicion, but his silence, intentional or not, radiates serenity. You walk with Brother Lentinus along the cloister path as he recounts tales. They say that in the East, elephants only speak once in their life and only to confess. Another tale says they make no sound because they are too full of thought. And one scribe wrote that an elephant once broke his vow of silence to warn a monk of a fire. You raise your eyebrows at that last one. Lentinus shrugs. The monk survived. The elephant returned to silence. What more proof do you need? The truth, of course, is more complicated. But when has that ever mattered to a good story? In medieval symbolism, the elephant's supposed silence became a metaphor for contemplation. Some religious orders used it to shame talkative novices. One manuscript features an elephant beside the Latin words tacere sapientis, est silence is the mark of the wise. And here's your academic sigh for the evening. Why did silence of all things become one of the most admired traits projected onto elephants? Because in a world of noise, clang of battle, endless sermons, political shouting, silence was rare. And where silence appeared, it was assumed to be intentional. Elephants didn't speak, so they must be thinking, deeply, eternally, about something profound, probably celery. Now the elephant walks past you, gently pressing its trunk to the stone floor. You imagine it saying nothing with purpose, with weight, with dignity. And you wonder when was the last time you heard someone say nothing and mean it. Here are 3 sleepy, silent facts before we drift. A royal court once held a formal vigil of silence in honor of a visiting elephant. No one was allowed to speak for 3 hours. Someone sneezed halfway through and was exiled from dinner. A poet named Gervase of Kent wrote 78 lines about the beauty of the elephant's silence. The poem was later translated into French and rhymed entirely with trunk. Poorly. One chronicler admitted after 4 pages of praise that he had never actually seen an elephant, and that the only one he knew of lived behind a monastery wall, too dignified to be observed. You lie back now against a sun-warmed bench as the elephant settles into the grass nearby. Not a trumpet, not a sigh. Just the steady, slow breath of a creature who never asked to be a symbol, but became one anyway. And in that hush, your mind stills too. Elephant graveyards and other myths. You're in a fog-draped forest now, where the trees lean in like they're keeping secrets, and the moss muffles your every step. The air smells of wet stone, fallen leaves, and something older, something that might be myth or memory, or just the vague scent of too many stories passed between campfires. And ahead of you, nestled beneath a ridge, lies what some call the elephant graveyard. Only, it's not quite what you expect. Tonight's historical fact. In medieval bestiaries and travel accounts, there are repeated references to elephant graveyards, places where it was claimed elephants went voluntarily to die. These graveyards were often imagined as sacred spaces, hidden glades, where elephants would retreat in silence as if they knew the end was near and wished for privacy. While these tales were largely fictional, they captured the medieval imagination with surprising tenacity. You step into the clearing. It's quiet, eerily so. The birds aren't singing. The wind moves but gently, and they're half buried beneath the soil are long pale arcs, tusks. Not many, not arranged, just present. Enough to give the illusion that maybe, just maybe, someone had once come here to rest and never left. In one corner, a monk is sketching with trembling hands. "This is holy ground," he whispers. "They come here to reflect, to remember, to return." You don't correct him. You don't even ask who they are or how he got here. You just sit down on a log and breathe in the story. Because stories like this have roots. Here's your odd detail of the night medieval writers often merged older tales from Greek, Roman, and Arabic sources with local superstition. In many of these accounts, elephants were said to carry deep emotional awareness. Some claimed they held funerals for their fallen. Others believed they wept at the bones of their ancestors, and from there, the idea of a specific death place emerged, a graveyard, not assigned, but chosen. The symbolism was irresistible. Imagine it, a place so sacred that only the wisest, gentlest giants go there. A cemetery, not of stone, but of instinct. The medieval mind steeped in relics, and pilgrimage saw this not as fantasy, but as evidence of a world more orderly than it seemed. And then the merchants arrived. Because if elephants really did gather to die in one place, imagine the ivory. Traders hunted for these graveyards across Africa and Asia, often guided by rumor and greed. Most found nothing. Some found scattered remains and assumed they'd arrived. Others simply invented maps and sold them for profit. You glance down at a crude drawing. One friar has made a circle of elephants all lying peacefully beneath a tree that doesn't grow in this country. Here's your academic twist for tonight. While there is no scientific evidence for elephant graveyards, as described in legend, elephants do sometimes return to the bones of their kind. They touch them with their trunks. They pause. It looks like mourning. It might be. That faint behavior observed by later naturalists was exaggerated, mythologized, and looped back through time until it became a full-blown belief in intentional elephant cemeteries. You look now at the tusks beneath the ferns. They're old, cracked, real, possibly, arranged, unlikely. But the story clings to them anyway. Because sometimes a place doesn't need to be true to feel true. 3 soft and slightly dusty musings before we fade. One explorer claimed to find an elephant graveyard in the Pyrenees, despite the fact that elephants had never lived there. When pressed, he admitted he'd actually found a pile of logs and a lot of wishful thinking. A court alchemist once used a sliver of graveyard ivory in a sleeping potion meant to calm nobles with too much guilt. The result: One man slept for 3 days and missed his own coronation. A monk who claimed to have visited a graveyard wrote, "The silence there was larger than the trees." His scroll is now kept in a drawer labeled unverified but poetic. You lie on the forest floor, now staring up at the shifting mist, the branches above like fingers folded in prayer. Somewhere you hear a soft rustle, not dangerous, not near, just part of the memory. The graveyard may not be real, but the peace it offers, that's something you can believe in. You're in a cobbled village square just before dawn, where the air smells of damp wool, unbaked bread, and the peculiar tension that arrives when something magical might happen. Villagers gather in tight little knots, wrapped in cloaks and superstition. Someone's brought a caged rooster as a witness. Another holds a candle unlit, waiting for a sign. And in the center of it all stands an elephant, draped in blue cloth, crowned with rosemary, watching the crowd like a priest evaluating a particularly unconvincing confession. Tonight's historical fact. Though rare, there are scattered medieval records of elephants being associated with miracles. In religious processions, healing rituals, and even early sainthood petitions, elephants were not just exotic curiosities, they were sometimes seen as divine instrument symbols through which blessings could be channeled or interpreted. You edge closer. The air thrums with anticipation. The elephant doesn't move, doesn't flinch, doesn't even seem particularly impressed. A friar steps forward with a silver basin of water and mutters something halfway between a prayer and an apology. The child, you learn, hasn't spoken in weeks. Fever, fear, or something less nameable. The village healer tried leeches. The priest tried Latin. But today the townsfolk are trying an elephant. A soft chant begins. The elephant blinks slowly, like it's waiting for better direction. Then it raises its trunk and brushes it gently, so gently across the girl's forehead. She sneezes, then giggles. A gasp spreads through the crowd like spilled wine. The candle is lit. The rooster crows. Someone faints, though. That may just be an unrelated medical issue. Here's your peculiar detail of the night. In 15th century Florence, a recorded procession described a royal elephant being led through the city during a time of plague. The people believed it brought protection simply by walking near their homes. Flowers were thrown from balconies. Infants were lifted toward its shadow. A baker reportedly named his entire family after the elephant, including a daughter called Truncella. Of course, the church was divided on all this. Some bishops saw the elephant as a marvel of God's creation, evidence of divine creativity, and symbolic of Old Testament wisdom. Others were more skeptical, labeling the whole affair dangerously close to idolatry. At least one bishop wrote, "It is a beast, not a saint, no matter how kindly it looks." You pause beside a well, where a woman drops in a small ribbon and whispers, "May he remember me." And now comes your gentle academic wrinkle. Did people truly believe the elephant caused miracles? Or was it simply a living canvas on which they could project hope? In a world filled with unexplained pain, plague, famine, failed crops, a creature so large and gentle, so unlike anything familiar, must have seemed like a sign. A bridge between the mundane and the divine. A reminder that awe itself is sometimes curative. Back in the square, the friar holds up a cloth the elephant sneezed on. It is immediately declared sacred. A merchant offers 2 goats and a jug of wine for it. The friar declines with visible regret. The elephant begins to move again, slow, deliberate like a cathedral, deciding to take a walk. People follow. Some sing. One child tries to pet its leg and is gently herded back by a tail flick. A rooster escapes its cage. Chaos ensues. The elephant remains unmoved. 3 small miracles to take with you as you drift. In one tale, a blind man touched an elephant's tusk and claimed to see a vision of Saint Martin riding a donkey. No one questioned the accuracy of this vision, mostly because he became the town's wine taster shortly afterward. A woman in Ghent swore her bread rose better after being baked in an oven the elephant had sneezed near. She sold slices as divinely puffed. People bought them. A chronicler describes an elephant bowing during Mass. Was it trained? Was it reacting to incense? Or did it just stretch? No one knows, but they rebuilt the chapel anyway. You sit now beneath a hanging lantern as the crowd disperses slowly, reverently. The elephant is led back toward the stable's ears, brushing against the wind. No horns, no fanfare. Just that quiet certainty that something good has happened. And maybe that's all a miracle ever is. The Pilgrim's Encounter. You're walking along a dusty medieval road lined with gnarled olive trees and the kind of silence that feels holy not because it's sacred, but because no one has the breath to talk anymore. Your boots are full of pebbles. Your shoulders ache. The sun is being judgmental. And yet you keep going because you're a pilgrim, and pilgrims don't turn back, even when their destination feels more myth than map. Up ahead, the path bends toward a ruined fountain. You hope for water. Instead, you find an elephant, just standing there, like it owns the crossroads. Tonight's historical fact: pilgrims in medieval Europe occasionally encountered elephants, especially when traveling through cities, where royal menageries or traveling animal processions crossed their routes. While these encounters were rare, the stories they inspired often blurred the line between memory and miracle fact and faith. You stop walking unsure whether you're hallucinating from thirst or witnessing a parable in real time. The elephant, for its part, does not move. It just looks at you, calm, curious, mildly judgmental. There are no handlers, no guards, just an elephant. And you, 2 travelers, one a little dustier than the other. You sit on a rock nearby, unsure what etiquette applies. Do you bow, offer a fig, pretend this is normal? Eventually, you reach into your satchel and pull out a crust of bread. The elephant leans forward, takes it delicately with its trunk, and gently lowers it to the ground beside a rock. It doesn't eat it. It just holds it there, like it's been given something sacred and isn't sure if it's worthy. You exhale, not because the elephant's behavior makes sense, but because in a strange way, it feels right. Here's your odd detail of the night. In the diary of a 14th century pilgrim traveling toward Santiago de Compostela, there is a short entry describing a gray beast, taller than all beasts with ears like saints' robes, who met me in the heat and did not ask for anything. The pilgrim then wrote, and I remembered why I was walking. That's it. No explanation. No follow-up. Just awe. You lean back, now studying the elephant more closely. Its eyes are rimmed with what looks like coal. Its skin is cracked but clean. And its presence, large, silent, enduring somehow makes you feel smaller and steadier at the same time. Other pilgrims arrive. They stop. They whisper. One drops to their knees. Another reaches out with trembling fingers, but stops short. No one speaks. Because suddenly, walking 1,000 miles for forgiveness or meaning, or hope doesn't feel quite so difficult when something this vast is just standing calmly at the crossroads. A friar in your group opens a psalter and begins singing softly. The elephant blinks slowly. A sparrow lands on its back. Somewhere in the distance, bells ring. Maybe real, maybe imagined. Now here's your academic little stretch before bed. Were these pilgrim elephant moments historical footnotes or emotional metaphors? Some scholars argue that the elephant functioned as a narrative device, a way for weary travelers to explain transformation. Others insist these moments were real chance meetings with royal animals being moved between courts or moments of pause during holy processions. And a few, the dreamy ones, believe the elephant was just what it seemed, something ancient and peaceful, showing up exactly when it was needed. And now, 3 final footpath facts. A pilgrim in Cologne claimed an elephant knelt beside him as he prayed. He later became a baker, swore off travel, and named his first 3 loaves Tusker's Blessing. Another traveler tried to sketch the elephant he saw outside a city gate. The resulting drawing had 6 legs, a bird tail, and was interpreted as a divine warning. It was actually upside down. One legend says that an elephant once led a group of lost pilgrims out of a storm. They never found it again, but a hill nearby is still called Beast's Light in the local dialect. You close your eyes. Now, head resting against your travel sack, the sound of slow breathing and soft wind keeping rhythm with your heartbeat. The elephant moves off into the olive trees, its body vanishing in the mist like a promise you weren't sure you deserved, but it came anyway. Books, beasts, and bias. You're inside a candlelit scriptorium now, where the scratching of quills sounds like 1,000 tiny feet running across parchment. The air smells of ink, old vellum, and an unhealthy amount of dried lavender. Someone spilled a pouch and no one wants to admit it. Shelves sag under the weight of illuminated manuscripts, many of which feature strange creatures, dragons, unicorns, and elephants that look like they were described secondhand by someone who once saw a blurry tapestry. You open a bestiary the size of a small dinner table. On the page, an elephant. Sort of. Its body is sausage-shaped. Its feet have hooves. The trunk looks like a particularly sad snake, and the eyes are eerily human. You blink. It does not. It stares into your soul with the solemn gaze of a creature that knows it's been misunderstood for at least 8 centuries. Tonight's historical fact. Medieval European depictions of elephants in manuscripts were wildly inaccurate for centuries, not just due to lack of access, but also because most scribes relied on earlier texts, hearsay, and artistic tradition. As a result, elephants were drawn less as animals and more as metaphors, or occasionally like furniture with legs. You turn the page and find an elephant carrying a castle on its back. Literal stone turrets, tiny banners waving in the illustrated breeze. Below a note, in Latin, Bellui, sapientissimi, capices oneris veritatis. The wisest of beasts capable of bearing the weight of truth. Sure, why not? Here's your odd detail of the night. Many medieval artists had never seen an elephant, nor spoken to anyone who had. Instead, they worked off descriptions passed down from Roman texts, travelers' exaggerations, or previous manuscript illustrations. Which meant any anatomical error got copied and recopied until it became tradition. One particularly popular version gave elephants cloven hooves and tails like dragons. Why? Because someone once described its backside as like the devil's broom. You slide over to a newer manuscript, fresher ink, more ambitious illuminations. The elephant in this one is frowning, its ears so large they could double as blankets. It's standing in front of a tree labeled Indian Wisdom Tree, though the tree itself looks suspiciously like a pine from southern France. The text describes the elephant as a noble beast who mates once every 100 years and weeps when confronted with vanity. There is no explanation for this, but it's underlined twice. Scribes were not always concerned with zoological accuracy. They were interested in meaning. And here comes your academic whisper, for the night elephants in medieval texts were more about what they symbolized than what they actually were. Strength, wisdom, chastity, foreignness, power. The elephant became a kind of Rorschach test for whatever the writer wanted to say about the world. Sometimes it was a stand-in for good kingship, strong yet peaceful. Other times it represented the church, able to carry the weight of mankind. And occasionally it symbolized Christ himself, misunderstood noble, and occasionally shown battling serpents for dramatic effect. You move now toward the back shelf, where a novice is illuminating a page by candlelight. He's coloring the tusks gold, not ivory, gold. The abbot says it's symbolic, he mumbles, of divine patience. You peek at the rest of the creature. It's wearing a robe. Of course it is. And now for your 3 scholarly chuckles before bedtime. One 12th century scribe drew an elephant with no trunk, then added a note I was told of the nose, but feared to guess. That nose was later added by another scribe upside down. A monk from York claimed that elephants laid eggs once a decade, and that the sound they made could shatter sinful glass. The manuscript has several cracked illustrations to support this. A scholar in Prague attempted to correct a badly drawn elephant by pasting over it a picture of a horse and writing, "Imagine it larger." That manuscript is now considered a national treasure. You settle into a bench near the fire as pages flutter in the quiet. The illustrated elephants around you, bizarre, misshapen, beloved gaze out of their worlds of ink and metaphor. They may not look like the real thing, but they carry something true. A desire to understand, to elevate, to imagine a creature so vast and wise that even when misdrawn, it still demands respect. And maybe that's what matters most. The Wise Watcher. You're standing at the base of a crumbling city gate where ivy curls over old carvings and time has softened the edges of once grand stonework. Rain drips gently from the eaves, not enough to soak your cloak, just enough to make everything smell like lickin' wet iron and dusted memory. Above the arch, high in the worn facade, sits a statue. It's not a saint. It's not a knight. It's not even a lion, which, let's be honest, would have been the go-to decorative choice for any medieval architect worth his chisel. It's an elephant. Perched like a sentinel, eyes downturned in perpetual observation, trunk curved around a small orb, possibly a globe, possibly a particularly smug cabbage. Tonight's historical fact. In several late medieval and early Renaissance buildings, especially in trade cities like Venice, Bruges, and Lisbon, elephants appeared in architectural decoration, not just as exotic symbols, but as figures of wisdom memory, and most notably watchfulness. They weren't there for grandeur. They were there to guard. You step back to get a better view. The elephant doesn't look fierce. It looks patient, composed. Like it's been watching the world for so long, it's given up on being shocked by it. A passing merchant glances up, follows your gaze, and mutters, "She's been there longer than the taxes," never blinks, never forgives. You're not sure he's joking. Here's your odd detail of the night. A few town records describe these elephant statues as keepers of order. One particularly poetic stonecutter claimed he was instructed to carve an animal that never forgets, so the people would behave like they're always being remembered. Big Brother. Try big pachyderm. You move through the winding alleys, and you begin to notice more of them smaller carvings above doorways embossed on old public fountains etched into faded tiles near the town hall. Always facing outward, always still. One cathedral has two elephants flanking its main entrance, their trunks entwined over the arch like some kind of granite handshake. A bishop reportedly chose them over angels, claiming angels were too hopeful and prone to flights of ego. Here's your gentle academic pondering for tonight. Were these elephants decorative flair, or part of a broader visual language about civic virtue? Scholars are split. Some believe the rise of elephant symbolism in architecture reflected growing connections with far-off trade, India, North Africa, the Silk Roads. The elephant was a marker of contact curiosity and culture. Others argue the symbolism ran deeper. The elephant, with its long memory and perceived calm, was a counterbalance to the chaos of urban life. A reminder that justice should be deliberate, that strength doesn't roar, that sometimes the most powerful figure on a building is the one not wielding a sword. And then there's the theory that architects just wanted something unusual to show off to rival cities. That's valid too. You pause at a corner where a much smaller elephant is carved into the keystone of a bridge. It's smiling, just slightly. The smile of someone who knows what happened here last year and isn't telling. 3 tusk-tickling trivia bits before bed. A sculptor in Flanders was commissioned to carve an elephant for a mayor's tomb. He carved a donkey instead, claiming no one in town had ever seen an elephant anyway. No one questioned it for 200 years. One town placed a carved elephant at the entrance to its court of law. Petitioners were told to whisper their wishes into its ear. The judge reportedly had a listening tube installed in the trunk. A 15th century moral tract stated the lion guards the crown, the owl guards the truth, but the elephant guards the soul. That line was later quoted in a soap ad, which somehow diminishes it, but not entirely. You settle on a low bench beneath a frescoed wall. Above you, the elephant watches, has always watched, will likely outlast the cobblestones. It doesn't judge, it just remembers. And you feel perhaps for the first time all day that being seen, really seen, isn't always something to fear. Sometimes it's just a kind of peace. What elephants forgot. You're in the back corner of a dusty university archive where parchment curls at the edges like sleeping cats, and the ink smells of vinegar soot and arguments. The room hums with the slow, warm silence of too much information. A scholar near you sneezes into his sleeve, then keeps reading without apology. You're here on a peculiar mission to understand what elephants forgot. Not because elephants have a reputation for forgetfulness, quite the opposite, in fact, but because buried in this sea of scrolls and footnotes is a thread of doubt. Tonight's historical fact. Though elephants were long admired in the medieval imagination for their memory, cited in bestiaries, religious texts, and even diplomatic letters as the beast that never forgets, some late medieval scholars began to question this belief. Quietly, carefully, sometimes with a wink, sometimes with a sigh. You find a folio titled De Bestiis Mentis, or On the Mental Beasts. It includes a chapter on elephants, where a monk from Bohemia writes, "Though the elephant is hailed as the vessel of memory, I observed one on 3 consecutive days, forget which tree bore figs. On the 3rd day, he simply knocked them all down." He adds, "This may be wisdom or hunger, or the rejection of unnecessary hierarchy. Either way, the elephant didn't get the figs." You lean back in your chair as a lantern flickers overhead. In the corner, a student reads aloud from a travel journal written by a merchant who had accompanied a caravan through North Africa. In it, he describes an elephant who forgot its handler's name after a week's absence, but still remembered where the apricot cart was hidden. So maybe it's not memory loss. Maybe it's selective recall. Here's your delightfully ironic detail of the night. A court document from 1483 accuses an elephant, yes accuses, of disobedience for failing to remember a ceremonial routine it had performed perfectly the previous season. The charges were dropped when it was discovered the elephant had been swapped with a slightly shorter one. No one admitted this for 2 weeks. The case became known very unofficially as the affair of the forgetful giant. And here's your softer academic whisper. What does it say about us that we projected perfect memory onto an animal? Was it admiration for its longevity? A quiet hope that someone somewhere might remember what the rest of the world forgot? Or was it a way to make ourselves feel small, yet comforted, knowing there were creatures older, steadier, and less prone to losing their house keys? You flip through a personal letter from a royal page who once fed an elephant grapes every morning. When reassigned for a fortnight, he returned to find the elephant refused to look at him. He wrote, "I believe he remembered me and chose not to acknowledge it." Oof. Some relationships are more complicated than they seem. And now, 3 slightly confused elephant facts before lights out. A scholar once claimed elephants forgot everything during thunderstorms and had to be re-educated afterward. He later admitted he had been standing next to a mule at the time. One scribe documented an elephant walking past the same wall 3 times and reacting differently each time. First admiration, then suspicion, then what he described as disdain. The wall was a mirror. A village in southern France insisted that an elephant remembered the smell of their garlic stew and returned every spring. Historians suggest this was actually just a very determined ox. You close the folio and stretch. Outside, the sky has shifted from dusk to ink. Somewhere far off, a church bell tries to ring. 12 gets distracted and gives up after 7. And you smile to yourself, realizing that maybe memory isn't about facts. Maybe it's about feeling. Maybe elephants remember the important parts and let the rest drift away like dust in a scroll room, which, let's be honest, might be the smartest approach of all. Traces in the dust. You're walking through a quiet field at dawn now, where the grass is silvered with dew, and the sky feels like it's just rolled out of bed. There's a soft crunch beneath your boots, gravel frost, maybe the echoes of stories that haven't fully faded yet. The road is empty. No caravans, no banners, no royal fanfare. But they're pressed into the soil, stretching forward like a memory still deciding whether to stay or go, are footprints. Huge, rounded, deep, and unmistakably elephantine. Tonight's final historical fact. By the end of the medieval period, elephants, once living symbols of power, wisdom, and divine order, had all but vanished from European cities. Their brief appearances became stories, then myths, then marginal illustrations in books that no longer knew if they were describing truth or metaphor. You crouch beside a print in the dirt. It's filled with rainwater, reflecting the pale morning light, like a small accidental mirror. You wonder who last saw the creature that made it. A farmer? A monk? A child with a pear in one hand and a question in the other? Elephants in medieval Europe came and went, like weather, unexpected, unforgettable, and then quietly, resolutely gone. The Tower of London's elephant died in 1257. Hanno, the Papal elephant, passed in 1516. Others left no name at all, just fragments in account books, drawings in the margins, stories told to people who were always a little unsure whether they were being entertained or educated. Here's your last curious detail. In some villages, the arrival of an elephant was recorded not as fact, but as a season, a marker of time. Year of the elephant, one record reads. Not the year it was born or died, just the year it was. That was enough. You stand now on the edge of what used to be a training field. A few wooden posts still stand rotted, leaning like old men. A patch of flattened earth remains where an elephant was once taught to bow, or at least to stay mostly still. A shepherd walks past. He glances at you, then at the ground. Ah, you found the footprints. You ask if it's real. Was once, he says. Long ago. My grandmother said it passed through here on its way to somewhere more important. She said it walked like it already knew where it had to go. You nod. That sounds right. Here's your final academic sigh. The legacy of elephants in the Middle Ages isn't really about their biology. It's about presence. What it meant to see something impossible, enormous, and unrepeatable. What it meant to feel small beside something peaceful. What it meant to remember, even if no one else would, because the elephants are gone now. But the roads they walked, still there. The footprints faint but stubborn, still waiting for rain. And the people who carry those stories, who whisper them into scrolls and fireplaces and bedtime rituals, still watching the horizon, just in case. So here are your last 3 footnotes of wonder. A tapestry in a French chateau shows an elephant walking into a forest with a lantern tied to its tusk. The caption reads, "He lights his own path." The artist is unknown. One monk claimed he saw an elephant in a dream the night before he died. His final words were, "It remembered me." A child's riddle from a 14th century notebook asks, "What walks on 4 legs forgets your name, but leaves you wiser?" The answer written, "The thing we only see once." You turn from the field now, back toward the road. The sun is higher. The world is waking. You carry no banner, no parchment, no proof. Just a footprint behind you, and a quiet sort of knowing. And that sometimes is enough. You're back in your own quiet room now. The candles have burned low. The air is still. And the world outside feels like it's holding its breath. No elephants here, no carved ones above the door, no royal parades, no distant trumpet calls echoing through stone courtyards. Just the soft rustle of your blanket, the faint hum of something old and calm inside you. But somehow, you still feel watched, not in a bad way, in a gentle, steady, unblinking way. Like something wise has been sitting beside you this whole time, breathing slow and quiet and patient. That's the thing about elephants. They come and go. They live enormous, impossible lives. They confuse poets, exhaust kings, make monks whisper, and architects guess. They carry castles, wake sleeping cities, and sometimes they simply refuse to do what they're told. And then one day, they're gone. But what they leave behind is not a roar or a relic. It's a rhythm, a deep breath, a long pause, a space large enough for silence to mean something. You've walked through stories tonight, real ones, strange ones, gentle ones, full of moss and memory. You've met animals that didn't ask to be worshipped or misunderstood. They just walked, slowly, kindly, and let us follow. And now you rest. Because somewhere in your dreams, a gray shape moves across the horizon, not hurrying, not explaining, just existing in that old wise way that makes everything around it a little softer, a little slower, a little more quiet. That's the story. For tonight, may your dreams be filled with wonder and peace.